Okay everyone, well thanks for coming down tonight. This has been a really fun meetup so far. I really enjoyed the first talk, so thanks for that. And yeah, my name's Dwight. I'm going to give a talk tonight on why static websites have still got it. This should be a fairly casual, low-key talk, not too technical, and probably nothing that's going to blow your mind, but hopefully it will give us some basics and just take a look at some thinking that I have about how websites are working these days. So just a quick introduction about myself. I'm a Queensland born and raised. I've lived in the Netherlands for the last 5 years though, or 6 years, since 2010. I studied software engineering at QUT and then worked at Accenture as a consultant for a while, which was an interesting career for a time. And then I got dragged over to Europe by a girl, and then managed to get out of the corporate gig and go work on startups. So I do a lot of events like startup weekends and helped try and build strengthen the startup community in Amsterdam. And when I came back to Australia here for a couple of months of a working holiday, I started to look around at the meetup scene and see what's happening with developers in Queensland, and got in touch with the guys and had the chance to talk to you tonight. So that's really cool. I'm excited about it. One of the things that I do when I'm not working as a contract and freelance developer at the moment is a quick side project called Knownly. This is basically a simple way to publish a website without a server using front-end technologies, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, so static websites, and that's where the kind of topic for this talk came from. I'm not going to talk about that too much tonight. What I want to do is just kind of give you guys maybe some extra ideas and some things to throw in the toolbox that you'll be able to think about using later on down the track when you're building stuff, getting projects started up, or building your own personal websites, portfolio websites, brochure websites, stuff like that. That's where I think there's a real sweet spot for static websites. So if you have any questions, just shout out. I'm going to talk for like 15 minutes. If you need to clarify anything, like how to spell my name, don't be like Starbucks and just write a bunch of crap on a cup. But yeah, this is it. So the static web. Basically what I think is interesting about the static web is we've kind of, over the last 10 years, made things super complicated and moved away a lot from simple websites. When Tim Berners-Lee, back in the early 90s, kicked off, and he was in Switzerland making the first web pages. They were nice and simple. It was like just static HTML. Extra resources like images and things came along with the Mosaic browser. But then over time we've just added so much stuff to the way we think about building a website now that when you go to get a very first version of just a prototype and in my scene around startups, a lot of people take so much extra time to build a full web application, putting up servers, spinning up AWS instances and things like that, when you could just start with a really minimum viable product that might be a landing page, and it can just be a static website. So there's a lot of extra complexity in these web apps that we build these days, and I just don't know that that's always such a good thing. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the advantages of static websites in more detail, and then I want to also cover some of the things that you need to be wary about when it comes to using maybe hosted blogs or hosting your own web application on your own infrastructure, or going for site builders as well, which is super popular. And probably, I don't know, and then people in the room as well who have used static website generators. Is everyone familiar with the concept? Okay, so maybe about a third of you, that's cool. So in the second part of the talk, I'll dive more into what a static website generator is and how you can work with that. And if we've got time at the end, I'll demo something as well.
Hey, what was that font that you're typing with?
This font is Sketch Rockwell or something. Do you want me to? Let's just go find out. That's probably the best question. Yeah, Sketch Rockwell.
View source.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
No worries. That's an interesting question. Okay, so let's do this. Yeah, static websites, I think they've got a few technical advantages. We'll go into a few in a little bit more detail. Scalability and availability. So when you've got a simple static website, they scale really nicely. Availability's easy to take care of, and I'll talk about why in a moment. Security is another big factor when you're starting to work with complicated web applications and you've got a lot of moving parts. Security can become an issue. Maintainability and portability can also be something to keep in mind. So we'll talk about that now. On the other hand, actually I'm going to jump back. I'm going to use this slide now and just dive in here. So when it comes to scalability and availability, if you're working with a static website and you've got like a Varnish proxy in front of it, you're going to be able to scale with a really simple architecture, and you're not going to have issues of being slash-dotted or taken out by large spikes in traffic. Static websites are also really well suited to moving your content, moving your website to a CDN as well. So if you work with a static website, you don't need to go into a lot of complicated in-memory caching. You can just stick the content straight into a CDN, and then you're going to obviously have your website geographically distributed close to the users. It's going to perform really, really well. And again, that sort of solves your availability problem at the same time. For security, like I said, there's fewer moving parts. So realistically, even if you went for probably the simplest thing that you could possibly do with a static website, which would be to throw up Nginx or Apache on a VM somewhere, you basically have only then the operating system to patch and maintain. You're not needing to patch your web application framework. You're not needing to patch maybe the database and other components of the system as well. So there's a lot less to worry about with a static website. It sort of reduces that surface area for different types of attacks that can come in. The other thing with a static website that you're hosting, because there's no dynamic processing at runtime or through the request loop, you avoid things like cross-site scripting and a whole other classes of attacks as well that come in with dynamic websites. Maintainability, portability in particular is great with a static website as well. You really avoid being locked into any particular platform. So you basically can move a static website, and if you start simple and begin with a static site and then later on you find, okay, well now we need more functionality and our product's growing, or we're basically ready to ramp this up. It's a lot easier to go from a simple static website into your favorite web application framework like like Node or Django or Rails or whatever you choose to use. So those are some of the advantages, I think, of just keeping it simple with a static website. We can go on now and take a look. So this is where I want to talk about some of the strings that come attached to your blogging software, some of the hosted providers as well, like WordPress.com, where you can pay for a WordPress blog, or WordPress engine, WP engine is another one. And then also some of the site builder platforms as well. Who's familiar with like Wix and Squarespace and these kind of guys as well? So yeah, we can look at a couple of my thoughts about that. WordPress, I think's biggest problem is the Swiss cheese sort of security setup that they have. I think it was just yesterday they announced that one of the top plugins, I think it was like a content type customizer, had a massive sort of vulnerability in it. It was just pumping out malware or something like that. And then this is like some stats. This is just some simple stats that I got from one of the security vulnerability databases. And over time, consistently WordPress is in core. This is the core WordPress as well, not even looking at all of the plugins and the wild west of independently developed code. They consistently got cross-site scripting issues and other exploits that you can see on the slide there. So when you're running with WordPress, you've kind of got to be on your game. You do get a lot for free, and it's a great way to get started, but if you then leave your server unpatched and you're not paying attention to it, then you're going to be potentially exposing yourself and your users to security vulnerabilities. And that was one of the main reasons that I started to think so much about static websites, is that I ended up managing like half a dozen blogs for like friends and family and stuff like that, and then I've got this stress of not, I haven't done I haven't built the right sort of database backup sort of solution. So I'm stressing out that there's no offsite backup for my friend's blog. And then I was thinking, okay, why do we have to have such a complicated website? So let's try and make it more simple. So that's the security situation. You're needing to be regularly patching WordPress, and then, yeah, not such a good situation to be in. When you go to paying somebody else to take care of all that sort of stuff, the options are really weird. Like, I haven't found good, cheap WordPress hosting anywhere. This is WordPress.com. To get access to Google Analytics, you've got to pay an enterprise account, and it's $300 a year. And I don't know why that needs to be a special opt-in feature. And it's basically the same when you look at many of the other competitors as well. So you're either paying a lot of money for a simple service, or what should be simple, or they're restricting you on otherwise, generally freely available features as well. So I think that's another good reason to sort of think about alternatives and other ways to do this. And then when we look at what are some of the downfalls or the strings that are attached to the site builders, so this is like Squarespace, I think, and you just really struggle to figure out how to actually use their admin. So there's a learning curve to get going, and then once you've kind of gone up that learning curve and you know what you're doing, you're then locked into that platform. So everything that you've just done is basically pinned to the particular site builder that you've chosen to work with, and you'll struggle to get your website out of there as well. And when you do, it's usually kind of really garbage syntax, and they use a lot of code generation, which reminds me of like Dreamweaver in '98 or something like that, with divs and non-breaking spaces all over the place. So that's the static web, and that's why I think that looking at an alternative like just running your own static websites should be something that we should all know how to do, and sort of realize that it's an option to save time early, and then keep it simple, because like we say, you ain't going to need it. So when you go and start deploying the full application stack, and then you just have a brochure website there, or you've got a client who says that they need a CMS, but they're going to call you every time they need it changed anyway, you probably don't need that whole heavy weight of the architecture. So let's look at static website generators now. So in principle, a static website generator is just a simple approach, a simple way to run an application on your local development machine that will take assets and fragments of HTML and your content, and then generate that into a self-contained website that you can then deploy just as flat files, static files. It takes a lot, it borrows a lot, I should say, from a lot of the application frameworks that are out there. So like templating, so HTML templates, local development servers, so you're actually able to run the website locally and see how it works and test it and do all of your cross-browser testing and all the things that you want to do without needing to ship the code anywhere. So people who are familiar with Rails or Django, these kind of web application frameworks that are fairly modern, a lot of those things that you get built into the framework, you'll get with the static website generators that I'll show in just a second. They're really good for generating blogs. The other focus point that they have is that they try and make it very easy to write content. When you've finished with your design and the build of the website, and you're more in like content creation mode, a lot of them work with Markdown or restructured text, which makes it easy to focus on the writing and the actual content creation as well. So that's one of the other nice things about the static site generators. So conceptually, that's how they basically work. You'll take content in the form of maybe Markdown. You've got templates. So if you've used Ginger or I forget the one that they use in Rails now. Does anyone know? The template. You guys are all familiar with templating languages, right? For HTML, it's pretty basic stuff. If you're not using a templating language, you're probably doing a lot of cut and pasting and bashing your head against the table every time you need to change a footer or something like that. So templates are nice and easy, and then all of your other static assets. There's then a process that runs locally. So you'll spin up a process. If you're using like Grunt or Gulp, it's a bit like having a watch command running in a console behind the scenes. So whenever you make a change to your template or you write some new content and you create a new page, the generator will pick that up. It will automatically reproduce the static website, and then even like with a browserify, it'll refresh the browser for you immediately so you can see your changes straight up. So the best parts is, like I was saying, the HTML templates and the Markdown for writing. So you get a lot of that modularity and reuse in a website. You're able to use some advanced tags and things like that as well to save you a lot of boilerplate code and basically not needing to repeat yourself, so the whole dry principle with your web development comes in. The local development server is really nice because you can code and develop offline on a plane and still have a live website that runs locally. The auto reload, like I said, speeds things up a lot as well. And then with the whole pipeline as well, so then again there's a lot of similar concepts to an advanced sort of gulp or grunt project where you'll have like Sass or less CSS compilation happening. You can do all of the crazy ECMA6 transpiling or whatever you want to do in a build pipeline type approach. And then it's going to spit out straight HTML and CSS and JavaScript that you then send to your web server. With quite a few of them, they have automated deployment as well built in, so it'll be just like a run the deploy command. And if you're hosting in S3, Amazon S3, it'll have your key and your tokens in your toolchain, and it'll just send your updated website straight to Amazon if that's where you're hosting it. Heroku as well has static hosting. My service, knownly, it's a Dropbox folder, so we're just basically on your local file system moving the build or the build folder from the project to a Dropbox folder, and then Dropbox does its syncing magic, and then it's in the cloud, and then we can serve it up. So that's how Knownly works. So there's a whole bunch of options for deploying, and that just makes it really fast as well. So you crank out a quick blog post, hit deploy, and you're live very, very quickly. There's plenty of options as well. Just pick sort of, I recommend people just choose what programming language they're sort of interested in, even though you're not going to be probably working with the application itself, the static website generator. If you do then want to go and contribute to the project as like these are all open source projects essentially. So if you want to contribute later, or you find that there's a feature that's not quite there yet, or there's a bug that you want to fix, then it kind of makes sense to be working with one that is in the language of your choice. So the two at the top are the JavaScript ones that I know of. Metalsmith is very modular, and it looks pretty cool. I haven't played with it yet. Harp's been around for quite a bit longer, and then they've got some other more like local CMS functionality as well. It starts to behave a little bit more like a CMS, but you're still running that on your local machine, and it's still emitting a static website, as far as I understand. So that's Harp. You could check those two out there. They're the JavaScript ones. Cactus is the bottom left. That's Python. That's my go-to. I'll probably use that if we demo, but I think I'm running a little bit late, so we may not do the demo tonight. Jekyll is by far the most famous one. Who's familiar with GitHub Pages? So GitHub Pages is where you can use, they'll actually do the generation on the server side. If you commit and you have it set up as a GitHub page, then they'll actually do the build on the server side for you. Although there's some restrictions around the plugins, I believe, so it can be worthwhile just running locally and then pushing the compiled website. Middleman, I think that is Ruby as well, and then Hugo is in the Go language. So if there's any Go developers in the room, you've got a static website generator there for you. So you're probably thinking, okay, this is great, static websites, but what can you do with a static website? How do you get interactivity? How do you do anything that's sort of beyond just brochureware? So I like to think about it in sort of three different areas. There's user-generated content, there's community, and then there's e-commerce and payments. So the three things that people always come to me about and say, well, how can I do payments and how could I have an e-commerce sort of web shop and a static website? So the trick is, like you probably have all seen, there's a lot of service providers out there that have widgets and plugins and little JavaScript snippets that you'll embed in a website. So that's essentially all you need to get this sort of thing going. On the user-generated content side, if you're looking for forum software, Discourse is really good. FormSpree is an awesome little service for putting a HTML form into your website. So if you want like a contact form or a feedback form, FormSpree is nice because it will basically route the post and the form request through their servers and then email you the form values in a fairly nicely formatted way that you can then work with. On community, yeah, it's pretty straightforward stuff there. I won't drain that too much, but it's great to keep in mind that with things like Stripe checkout, PayPal's checkout widget, and then even for people who are running a broader catalog of products, Shopify works pretty well also. So you can actually embed a full Shopify catalog into your own static website, and then you're able to get away from being locked into their UI and their design decisions, and then you're able to work with your own front-end developer, or work yourself on the design that you want with full flexibility in that website of yours. So that's basically it. That's all I wanted to cover tonight in about 15 minutes. So we've looked at some of the advantages of static websites, why they're good to keep in mind, keep in the toolbox, and don't overlook them when you need to go get started with something. Don't immediately start NPMing all sorts of crap into your development environment. We looked at some of the gotchas as well. So if you have a product manager or a boss who's saying, let's go and just spin up WordPress and host it with WordPress.com, you'll have a few reasons to maybe reconsider whether that's the best option to go for long term. And then I hope that hopefully you've all now sort of understood what a static website generator is all about and what it can be used for and why it will save you time. So yeah, that was it. Are there any questions? Silence. Tumbleweed.
What's your favorite?
I use Cactus. Yeah, it has a directory structure that mimics a little bit more the actual outputted structure, and you don't need to follow so much convention. Like with Jekyll, you're using like file names that start with an underscore, and their folder structure is a little bit rigid. So I like Cactus, and I'm pretty excited about a couple of new projects as well. That Lectern is another one, or Lecter. And that has, again, similar to PARP, some local CMS type functionality. So you don't have to be writing code the entire time. You'll basically be defining a simple data model with configuration, but then it has like a live admin sort of panel that will then allow you to do things that start to look a little bit more like a WordPress admin. So that can be useful if you've got a client or an end user who will be producing content for you that isn't fully command line compliant. So yeah, those are some of the website generators that are out there.
What you're doing is awesome. With Noli, do you support custom SSL certificates?
That's something that I'm working on. Yeah. It's a side project of mine, so I don't get to make as much progress as I would like. But I want to. One of the next things. Who's familiar with Let's Encrypt, which is a new project. So that's a really nice way to get all of your websites behind TLS encryption, which is very important these days. So yeah, that's one of the things that I really want to get in there, because we shouldn't really be, even though there's not a lot of need with a static website for a secure connection. When you start to have payment and things like that in your page, you really want to have the entire site behind that encryption layer. So yeah, that's on my to-do list. Cool. Another question?
You mentioned about migration with these CMSs and other systems. You pretty much lock in your content.
Yeah.
How will you ensure that the actual static content is migrated into the other system?
Well, that's okay. So there's probably two things to consider there. One is just from purely portability, you can always shove the generated outputted website anywhere you want. So that's just more like a lift and drop. I'm not happy with Amazon anymore, I want to go to a different web server or virtual private server host. But then from a sort of portability in terms of them being able to continue working with that code and the source code that you've built. So if you're using Jekyll, for instance, you're going to be using the Liquid, I'm pretty sure it's Liquid templating. And then that's the same templating language that you'll use in a Ruby website. So then if you go from a static Jekyll app to a more full-blown, more full-blown Jekyll web application, sorry, I keep if you go from Jekyll to Ruby on Rails, I should say, then I'm pretty sure it's Liquid. The Cactus, the Python example I gave, uses the Django templating language. So then, and for me, I'm primarily a Django developer or a Python developer, and my web application framework of choice is Django. So it makes it super fast when I do want to go from a simple brochure landing page, maybe it's a sign up for the beta of a new service. It's pretty quick then to convert that from a Cactus static site into a full-blown Django web app. And then you can, of course, move that around and host it where you need. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But like sites like Drupal tell exactly the same. We're using Twig, so you can take the front and pretty much just work very well.
I would advocate for this bit, the fact that you're purely using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then I think you're a lot closer to the core technologies that will give you portability later on. All right, guys, I better wrap it up there. I've got to go and get on a call. So thanks very much.